33-year-old Janelle Melton lived in Neptune City, New Jersey in 2009. She had an apartment in the Brighton Arms apartment complex. Janelle worked as a social studies teacher at Red Bank Middle School in New Jersey. She had a passion for history and knew how to get her students into it. On September 14th of 2009, Janelle still had not shown up for school by 8 a.m. It was an important day as she had a guest speaker lined up for her students. The school secretary asked Janelle's estranged husband, Michael Melton, to go check on her at her apartment. Janelle met Michael after college. He said he used to flirt with her a bit. They started dating and got married in Jamaica in August of 2003. They both became teachers at Red Bank Middle School. The marriage was good for about 3 years. Michael said he wasn't used to so much affection or having someone love him so much. He had started a basketball company and was gone a lot. Michael eventually filed for divorce. Janelle became comfortable having her own space. They were still cordial and spoke on the phone every day. When Michael received the phone call from the school's secretary that Janelle did not show up for work, he immediately drove to her apartment. He saw Janelle's car in the driveway. He entered the house and called out her name. He walked into her bedroom and saw her on the floor. Janelle had her nightgown on and Michael saw what looked like blood on it. It appeared to him that she had fallen while she was putting her makeup on. He called 911. Michael said he remembered asking Janelle what she had done. He thought that perhaps she could not handle the separation and had harmed herself. The paramedics arrived at Janelle's apartment around 9:20 a.m. They immediately determined that she was not alive anymore. Investigators found that Janelle had been beaten and tortured over a period of time, probably to get information from her. She had been shot in the head twice and stabbed 5 times. Janelle had been beaten so badly that her jaw was broken in 2 places. Investigators believed at least 2 people were responsible due to the brutality of the slaying. The kitchen window was the point of entry. There was a footprint impression on the chair below the window inside of the apartment. The kitchen had been ransacked. The cabinets were opened and it appeared as if someone had been searching through the cereal boxes. It is believed that Janelle's life was taken during the night of September 13th in her bedroom. Investigators found a frayed piece of duct tape which probably was used as some kind of binding. The duct tape had blood on it and there were latex gloves found near Janelle's body. The evidence was collected and stored so that it could be used later. Michael was interviewed by the police as he was the one that first found her body. Police first tried to collect any information about his relationship with Janelle. Michael admitted that they were still sometimes having relations. He said he felt like the questions were very evasive, but the police needed as much information as they could. Michael said he was visiting a friend on the night that Janelle's life was ended. His alibi was looked into. The police spoke to Michael's friend. His phone records didn't put him anywhere near Janelle's apartment on the night of the crime. Michael also consented to a DNA swab. 2 days after Janelle's slaying, a newspaper article came out. In the article, it said Michael was her estranged husband and Janelle was found slain in her home. The article also mentioned that the divorce was to be finalized on October 6th. Michael realized that people thought he was responsible for taking her life. Michael said everyone turned on him. Janelle's family and their colleagues all believed he was responsible. Michael's friend was an attorney. He agreed to defend him pro bono. He was told not to speak to anyone. When Michael returned back to work, he had a memo on his desk saying he could not teach anymore or have any contact with students. Michael met the school officials with his attorney. It was recommended to him that he take a desk job while the investigation was ongoing. On November 10th of 2009, 2 months after Janelle's body was found, the DNA came back from on the duct tape. The duct tape had Michael's DNA on it. Janelle's DNA was also found on it from the blood that was left behind. The police believed that Janelle had been duct taped to a chair before the attack. Michael claimed that the tape had been stuck to his shoe when he found Janelle, so he used his hands to pull it off, and that was why his DNA was on it. Realizing no one believed that he was innocent, Michael turned to alcohol and even contemplated taking his own life. There was also DNA found on the pink lighter, but it unfortunately came back as inconclusive. All of the evidence was transferred to the New York City Medical Examiner's Office for additional analysis. A few months after Janelle's slaying, investigators were still receiving tips. One neighbor believed he had heard a loud noise. One woman said her dogs were awoken by the noise. A tall black male that did not live in the complex was spotted near the apartment acting suspiciously. Many people close to Janelle were angry that these neighbors had been sitting on this information for months. On December 3rd of 2012, 3 years after the crime, the police learned that they had a DNA match from the lighter. It came back as belonging to Gregory Jean-Baptiste, a Bloods gang member. He was then questioned by the police. Baptiste said that he had never seen Janelle before and had never been at her apartment. The police went in circles with Baptiste as he would not confess to anything. After 27 minutes, he refused to talk anymore. Michael reached out to a friend to help clear his name. The friend went out to talk to people in the area. The friend actually got crucial information, and Michael told police about what he had heard. Apparently, gang members were looking for a drug dealer named David James, aka Munch. David lived directly next to Janelle. It was rumored that David had $15,000 in a freezer. His girlfriend was overheard by these people talking about drugs at a party. They ended up at the wrong apartment and assumed Janelle was the girlfriend of David. Investigators then went out searching for anyone who would talk. Finally, an informant gave them 3 names. A fourth person, a woman, was their getaway driver. The men were identified as Ebenezer Bird, Gregory Jean-Baptiste, and Jerry Spaulding. All 3 were part of the Bloods gang. The woman was later identified as Elizabeth Pinto, a former girlfriend of Ebenezer Bird. It was on December 1st of 2015 that a woman named Norika Scott identified Elizabeth Pinto as the getaway driver. Norika had been Ebenezer Bird's current girlfriend. She went to the police after hearing his confession during one of their prison visits. It was clear to the police that she had been very afraid to come forward. Elizabeth Pinto was interviewed. She was also afraid to talk. She finally said Janelle deserved justice and admitted that she was the getaway driver. She said that all 3 men dressed in black and told her where to drive. Pinto was shown photos of all 3 men, and she was able to identify them by name. She said she did not know where she was driving to. She agreed to show where she had dropped them off. She pled guilty to conspiracy and agreed to testify against all 3 men. Pinto was also able to tell the police that all 3 men had put on latex gloves. Pinto dropped them off nearby and watched them walk across the street towards the apartment. On March 23rd of 2016, all 3 men were charged with taking Janelle's life, second-degree robbery, conspiracy, and unlawful weapons charges. They all maintained their innocence. The trial began on January 17th of 2019. Elizabeth Pinto was the star witness for the prosecution. The defense argued that Michael was the real culprit. The defense claimed that there was still a lot of evidence that had not been tested. The prosecutors believed that Janelle was home alone on September 13th of 2009. Elizabeth Pinto went to the home of Bird's mom and found all 3 men there. They had her drive them over to the Brighton Arms apartments. Baptiste went in through the window and dropped his lighter. He then opened the sliding door to let the others in. Janelle was in her bedroom. Before the attack, they taped her to a chair. They were searching for the money and drugs, but realized that they were in the wrong apartment. They shot Janelle, probably so she would not identify them. The phone records of all 3 men placed them at Janelle's apartment. They were all found guilty of taking Janelle's life, robbery, conspiracy, and weapons charges. A 4th man, James Fair, was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit burglary. He had been the one to spread the word that David kept his money in the freezer. They were all sentenced to life in prison. Elizabeth Pinto pled guilty to conspiracy and was sentenced to probation. Their crime spree, which spans over 28 years, is over, said Superior Court Judge Joseph W. Oxley. James Fair is serving an 82-year sentence from unrelated charges. One of Melton's sisters, Connie Sadler, told the judge about the victim's dedication to her profession and her students. Janelle was not just a teacher by profession, Connie said. It was her mission. I believe Janelle knew that teaching was her calling from God. Janelle wanted to do more than inspire students academically. She wanted to make a real and lasting impact in their hearts and their lives. What the three men did to her sister was a heinous and demonic act, Connie said. But, she added, I know Janelle is a Christian and she would want me to forgive them. I pray for them and I pray that God will have mercy on them. But every action has a consequence. Michael Melton went to rehab and he is now focusing on his basketball spotlight company. He said that after he had heard about what really happened to Janelle, half of him was feeling relieved because they knew it was not him who did that to Janelle. The other half is feeling heavily distraught because she lost her life over some money. He said, now, my life is really not about me anymore. It's about working for the community and trying to help save people's lives. That's what gives me the peace and motivation I have each day. I was given a second chance, so I have to do the best I can with the gift I've gotten. 51-year-old Paul Stephen Gendreau lived in Moyock, North Carolina in 2010. He had 2 daughters, Stephanie and Christina. Paul had been married several times. He was a retired Navy chief. Before retiring from the Navy, Paul earned the ranking of Grand Master Chief. Paul's brother Mike described him as a stand-up guy and had many close friends and family members. His wife at the time was Letitia Jandreau. They met in 2002 at a kickboxing class. Letitia was 29 years old, a competitive bodybuilder and an accomplished sportswoman. She even won the National American Sports Federation's North Carolina Bodybuilding Championship in June of 2010. Letitia worked in human resources at a children's hospital in Norfolk, Virginia. Letitia was described as very shy, but Paul really wanted to get to know her. He proposed that they become workout partners and the relationship seemed to blossom. Paul had been married when he first met Letitia, but he was just waiting for his divorce to be finalized. Paul and Letitia were an unlikely pair and the complete opposites of each other. Paul was outgoing and Letitia was quiet and shy. After a few months of dating, Paul asked Letitia to move in with him. In May of 2003, Paul's divorce was finalized and a month later he married Letitia. They were described as happy and affectionate with one another. In 2009, Letitia started working for Blackwater Airlines and continued to train for her bodybuilding competitions. She had won or placed in the top for several competitions. Paul would travel to the competitions with her and brag about her accomplishments to his friends. On June 30th of 2010, Paul did not show up for work. He worked for a company that services Navy ships. He usually came into work around 5:30 a.m. and had been working on an important presentation. Around 7:45 a.m., Paul's coworkers reported him missing. Paul led a very punctual life, so his coworkers were immediately concerned. Deputy Sheriff Lisa Starcher from the Currituck County Sheriff's Office drove out to the Gendreau home to perform a welfare check. Starcher arrived at Paul's Brumsey Landing home. There were multiple cars spotted in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Paul's coworkers contacted Letitia through her workplace to see if she knew where he was. Letitia said she did not and left work to meet with the deputy. Letitia allowed the deputy into the house. She explained that she and Paul slept in separate bedrooms due to the noise of Paul's CPAP machine. But when she entered Paul's bedroom, the machine was gone. Letitia explained that they had an open relationship and were both seeing other people. Letitia said Paul most likely just left on his own to stay with one of these other women. But after a few days of back and forth and no news of Paul's whereabouts, the authorities determined some foul play was involved. Paul's co-workers came to the same conclusion. They went out looking for him and handed out missing persons flyers. It was clear that everyone respected and loved Paul. On July 1st of 2010, the police were notified that Paul's phone had pinged off a tower in Elizabeth City about 30 minutes from his house. The police canvassed nearby hotels and learned that Paul may have been spotted at a Hampton Inn. The manager of the hotel was shown Paul's photo and said that she saw him the night before and that morning. She said that Paul was acting odd, however, this turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Paul had not registered at the hotel and he was not seen on any of the surveillance cameras. Later that same day, a construction worker found Paul's phone in the parking lot of an elementary school in Elizabeth City. The construction worker had called Paul's brother Mike Gendreau, who said that his brother was missing. The construction worker then turned Paul's phone into the Elizabeth City Police Department. The police continued to canvass the area near the elementary school. A utility worker also claimed to have spotted Paul walking down the street. However, the police were sure that it was a case of mistaken identity, which they would later be right about. Still on July 1st, the police received a 911 call from one of Paul and Letitia's neighbors. They had spotted Letitia and an unknown man moving furniture from the house. The man was later identified as Letitia's brother, 39-year-old Eugene Askew. When the police arrived, they told Letitia to move the furniture back into the house. She complied and said she was getting some new furniture and taking the old stuff to put in storage. Letitia and Paul's neighbors had also noticed that Letitia was putting things up on the windows to keep people from looking in. Letitia had used wrapping paper and frosting spray to cover up the windows. The neighbors and co-workers told the police that things in the Gendros' marriage had taken a dark turn. After trying to have a baby, Letitia had gotten pregnant with twins after going through several rounds of IVF. Letitia ended up losing the babies about 21 weeks into the pregnancy. Letitia had also said they were separating and both seeing other people. Paul's co-workers said that Paul had filed for divorce and wanted Letitia out of the house. 2 weeks before he disappeared, Paul had filed a report that someone had keyed his car. Paul kept his beloved Dodge Charger in pristine condition. The police learned that it had most likely been Letitia because the car had been kept in the garage. Letitia had mentioned this to the police, but never admitted to doing it. On July 2nd, Letitia agreed to turn over Paul's personal computer. But when the police went to the Gendros' house, she wasn't there. The note on the door said, "Went to River's Edge. Call me on my cell. Thanks." However, Letitia did not answer her phone. Letitia ended up calling 911 to report that people were outside her house when she was not home. She told the dispatcher that she was in Chesapeake, Virginia. The dispatcher was able to trace the phone call from the Brumsey Landing home. Letitia was inside the house and her behavior had become very odd. Just after midnight on July 3rd, the police returned to the house with a search warrant. Letitia did not answer the door. The police found the garage door unlocked, but it was barricaded with heavy garbage. They were eventually able to make entry and found Letitia hiding in a closet covered by clothes. Letitia was read her rights and claimed she had been hiding because she was afraid that people thought that she did something to Paul. She kept her head in her hands and would not make eye contact. While Letitia was being questioned, other detectives were searching the house. In a twist, in the master bedroom where Paul slept, the police found blood spatter, a bullet hole in the wall, and a bullet skid mark under a rug. The rug had been glued to the floor. In the garage, the police discovered a blue tote. A shower curtain was taped over the top of the tote. After removing the shower curtain, the police were hit with the smell of decomposition. Paul's body was recovered under several layers of plastic, tape, and kitty litter. He was shot with a .45 caliber handgun 5 times, once each in the abdomen, chest, thigh, neck, and hand. Paul had about 12 lacerations to his head that were consistent with being struck by a blunt object such as a pistol. His cell phone was missing from the residence. Officers discovered an assortment of cleaning supplies in the residence and reported that the primary bedroom's hardwood floor looked like it had been scrubbed. The officers also confiscated spent bullets from the scene. They also confiscated duct tape, caulking, and plastic wrap among other items from the kitchen. Letitia was confronted about what they had found. She then spun a story about how she had hired several men in Elizabeth City to beat up Paul. She said she met random men on the street in Elizabeth City and said that Paul was mistreating her. The police did not believe Letitia and they arrested her. In yet another twist, after spending about a day in jail, Letitia said she wanted to talk. Now, she said, she did take Paul's life, but in self-defense. Letitia said Paul attacked her on the morning of July 30th of 2010. She said he came into her room with a gun and said he wanted her out of the house by the time he came home from work. Letitia said she grabbed her gun, a 45mm, walked to Paul's bedroom and just kept shooting. She said they struggled even after he was shot several times. The police recovered Letitia's gun from her car at the house. The gun was registered to one of Letitia's boyfriends, Kyle Koenig, a retired Air Force general. She had stolen the gun from him. Letitia had been sued by another boyfriend. The police found a copy of the lawsuit at the house. The man claimed he had been taken advantage of by Letitia. Letitia had asked for money and claimed that she was pregnant with his twins. The man spoke to Paul about it, and Paul filed for divorce. A receipt was also found in the house for the purchase of the tote. Letitia was seen on surveillance footage at Lowe's buying the tote. In September of 2012, Letitia testified at her trial. She maintained her story that she had shot Paul in self-defense. However, the evidence did not match with her story. Paul had suffered from multiple gunshot wounds and severe blunt force trauma. There was a bullet hole found in the master bedroom door. It is believed that Paul had the door closed and that he had been ambushed by Letitia. Letitia shot him several times and hit him in the head with the gun. The attorney and one of his co-workers also alleged that Paul had told them about one night when he woke up to find Letitia crawling across his room. Paul reportedly told his attorney that he used to keep the door of his room locked from then on. Paul's brother Mike said he had last met with Paul in February while attending the Daytona 500 stock car race. He also testified that Paul had told him about his marital problems and also alleged that Letitia was cheating on him. Mike reminisced he'd been talking about divorce for weeks. He told me she was cheating on him and that he had plenty of evidence. He said he just needed her to get out of his house so he could have his life back. The jury deliberated for an hour and 40 minutes. On September 28th of 2012, Letitia was found guilty of taking Paul's life and larceny of a firearm. She was sentenced to life without parole. Letitia's appeal was denied in 2014. It is believed that she took Paul's life because she did not want to give up the lifestyle he had given her. She was a master manipulator and used Paul and several other men. As per official records, Letitia is presently incarcerated at Anson Correctional Institution in Polkton, North Carolina. Dennis and Brenda Bowman were a married couple with 2 children from Holland, Michigan in 1989. They lived on the corner of Lincoln Road and 52nd Street. Dennis worked as a wood machinist and Brenda used to work at the jewelry counter at the Meyer department store. Their 2 children were Andrea and Vanessa Bowman. Andrea was born on June 23 of 1974 as Alexis Badger. Her biological parents are Kathy Turkanian and Randy Badger. Before her first birthday, she was adopted by Dennis and Brenda Bowman and renamed. Vanessa was born in January of 1988. Andrea went from being an only child to more than a big sister. She was a third parent to the chubby red-headed baby. While other kids her age went to after-school clubs and Friday night football games, Andrea stayed home changing diapers and cleaning bottles. On March 11th of 1989, Dennis Bowman contacted police. He told them that he had come home from his job to find 14-year-old Andrea missing. Dennis said that some of Andrea's belongings along with $100 from his dresser was also missing. He told police that Andrea was a troubled teenager who frequently fought with her mother and had run away to a friend's house once before. With no foul play suspected, the police labeled Andrea a runaway and passed her case along to the Youth Services Bureau. Few people who knew the Bowmans questioned the official narrative. Over the years, there had been whispers about the family. Once, when Andrea was in middle school, she boarded the school bus bleeding from her wrist. Some kids gossiped that she attempted to take her own life, but others said Andrea had cut herself trying to get back into her house after her parents locked her out. There were rumors that Dennis, a former Navy reservist with reddish-brown hair, a goatee and wire-rimmed glasses, and Brenda, a portly woman with curled bangs, abused Andrea. But back then, what happened behind closed doors was considered family business. Many people in Holland assumed that Andrea had gotten so fed up with her home that she finally split. Maybe she'd gone looking for her birth mother. People heard that she'd hitched a ride to a local truck stop and had left town with an older boy or was pregnant. Brenda reported a series of tips in the weeks and months following her daughter's disappearance, all of which seemed to confirm that Andrea had run away. A single photograph formed most people's memory of her. It was given to the police when she first vanished. In it, Andrea is sitting against a blue studio backdrop and looking just off camera, with her green eyes cast upward. Photos of missing children were often printed on the sides of milk cartons or on flyers taped to the top of pizza delivery boxes. Andrea's picture wound up somewhere else. In 1993, the band Soul Asylum debuted a music video for its song Runaway Train, featuring the images and names of missing kids across America. The video was a huge hit, with several versions airing on MTV and VH1. In the one that played in Michigan, Andrea's photo appears just after the 2-minute mark. Reflecting on the video 20 years after its release, director Tony Kaye claimed that more than 24 missing children were found because of the video. Unfortunately, Andrea Bowman wasn't one of them, and her case went cold. The next major update in Andrea's case would come in 2010 when Carl Koppelman stepped in. Carl took an interest in true crime, which led him to Web Sleuths. It is a forum where crime hobbyists and armchair detectives connect and collaborate on unsolved cases. Spent countless hours scrolling through the national database of missing persons and unidentified bodies known as NAMAs. There is an overlap between the two main parts of the database, the disappeared and the deceased. Carl tried to match the characteristics of people who had gone missing with those of unidentified remains found. When Carl noticed that the age and condition of some of the bodies might make it difficult for loved ones to recognize them, it sparked an idea. He started creating lifelike renderings of Jane and John Does based on photos taken post-mortem. Some of the solved cases that we've covered on this channel before have been solved because of these renderings. Once he finished a rendering, Carl sent it to NAMUs, and the database would sometimes publish it. He also posted his work on Web Sleuths so other armchair detectives could use it in their identification efforts. Eventually, Carl began working with police departments and the DNA Doe Project, which identifies human remains through genetic testing and genealogical research. Carl got interested in the case of the Racine County Jane Doe. She was found near the edge of a Wisconsin cornfield in 1999. She had been not alive for about 12 hours, but rain washed away any evidence that might have been useful to investigators. It seemed likely that the young woman's life was taken elsewhere and dumped. An autopsy determined that she may have been cognitively disabled and that she had suffered long-term abuse and neglect. She had broken bones and a cauliflower ear, and her body showed signs that she was assaulted. More than 50 people from the farming community where she was found attended her funeral. She was found wearing a men's gray and silver Western-style shirt embroidered with red flowers. On NAMAS, Carl plugged in some general search criteria: gender, age, location, and clicked through the results for missing persons. In most cases, the answer was a clear no. The age didn't match or the location made no sense. But one entry gave Carl hope: Andrea Bowman. Andrea and the Racine County Jane Doe shared physical characteristics and their ages aligned. Andrea would have been 25 in 1999 when the Jane Doe's life was taken. Holland, where Andrea disappeared, sits directly across Lake Michigan from where the Jane Doe was found. It's just 4 hours by car from one location to the other. Carl took his theory to law enforcement, who found it compelling enough to actually investigate. To determine whether the Jane Doe was Andrea, police would need to compare DNA from the body with that of someone in Andrea's family. Because Andrea was adopted, authorities had to track down her birth mother, which took a while. Andrea's birth mother is Kathy Turkanian. In 1972, at the age of 14, she ran away from her family. Kathy left Virginia, where they lived, and hitchhiked to Memphis, Tennessee, and she had no money. Kathy met 19-year-old Randy Badger. In December of 1972, Kathy and Randy traveled to South Carolina, where it was legal for a minor to get married if they had parental permission. Kathy's parents gave it gladly because they did not want to be responsible for her at all. The couple were married less than a year when Kathy found out she was pregnant. On June 23 of 1974, Kathy gave birth to a healthy daughter. She named her Alexis. When Alexis was 5 months old, Kathy and Randy separated, and she went back to live with her parents in Virginia. Kathy realized she was going to receive no help from her family and couldn't give Alexis the life that she wanted to. Alexis was put up for adoption and was soon adopted by Dennis and Brenda Bowman. In April of 2010, police working on Andrea's case sent a letter to Kathy Turkanian's home. The letter explained that Andrea disappeared from her adoptive home and that she might be a Jane Doe found in Wisconsin. Police needed a sample of Kathy's DNA to know for sure. Kathy was willing to share her DNA, but she wanted to know more about what had happened to her daughter. In the letter, it gave no details, and Kathy didn't even know that her name was changed to Andrea Bowman. She searched online for information about missing girls in Michigan. It didn't take long to find one from the town of Holland whose birthday and physical description matched Alexis's. When she saw the girl's school photo, Kathy thought Andrea Bowman could be her daughter. In her quest to find out more about Andrea, she connected with Carl Koppelman. While waiting for the DNA test results, Kathy also got in touch with a retired Michigan detective named Pat O'Reilly. Pat told Kathy that Andrea's adoptive father, Dennis Bowman, was responsible for her disappearance. Let's take a deeper look at Dennis and other crimes he committed. In May of 1980, a 19-year-old woman was riding her bike north of Holland, Michigan, when a motorcyclist forced her off the road. The man told her to get off her bike and walk into the woods. The young woman didn't move. The man pulled out a gun, fired a shot past her, and repeated the order. Still, she didn't budge. The man fired the gun again, this time at the ground near her feet. He said he would shoot her next. Just then, a car drove by and the motorcyclist turned his head towards the noise, and the young woman took the opportunity to pedal away as fast as she could. The man didn't shoot or give chase, and she was able to flag down someone in a pickup truck who drove her home. Her parents called the police, and the young woman provided a description of the suspect. A white male with tinted glasses and a blue helmet. His motorcycle, she said, had a blacktop case mounted on the back. By the end of the day, the police had detained a suspect. The young woman took one look at him and confirmed that he was the man who tried to attack her. It was Dennis Bowman, who by then was already a husband and a father. At the time, Andrea was almost 6 years old. Dennis was convicted of assault with intent to commit criminal conduct and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He was referred for psychological counseling, and a judge determined that he would likely pose a danger to women if he was free. Still, Dennis served the minimum sentence. One day in 1998, a state trooper in Dorr, Michigan responded to an alarm at the mobile home of 28-year-old Vicki Vandenbrink. She'd reported so many break-ins that the sheriff's department had installed a security system. When the trooper arrived at the scene, he found Dennis Bowman walking away from the back door. The Bowmans had moved to Hamilton, a town nestled between Holland and Dorr, in 1989, shortly after Andrea's disappearance. Dennis told the officer he was temporarily staying with Vicki Vandenbrink, who was a former co-worker of his. He was let go, but when authorities got in touch with Vicki, who wasn't home when the alarm went off, she said Dennis was lying. Dennis then changed his story, telling law enforcement that he'd entered the trailer to use the bathroom. He'd been there at least once before, he claimed, when his daughter Vanessa wanted to sell Girl Scout cookies to Vicki. Skeptical, the police obtained Dennis permission to search his property. In the loft of an outbuilding, they found a black duffel bag containing lingerie that was later identified as Vicki Vandenbrink's, as well as a short-barreled shotgun, a black sweatshirt, and a mask. Kathy Turkanian learned the details of Dennis Bowman's criminal record after submitting a Freedom of Information Act request based on what Detective Pat O'Reilly had told her. After seeing what he did to other women, Kathy became convinced that Dennis Bowman took Andrea's life. If Kathy was right, it would mean that the Racine County Jane Doe wasn't Andrea. That theory made sense only if Andrea was still alive 10 years after she disappeared. In 2013, the long-awaited DNA results confirmed it. Kathy was not related to the Jane Doe. In September of 2013, Kathy and Carl met in person at the Missing in Michigan conference. Organized by the state police, the conference was designed to raise awareness about and hopefully generate leads for cold cases. Kathy and Carl showed up in custom shirts they made that read, "Find Andrea Bowman." Carl scanned the room and was surprised when his eyes landed on familiar faces. He nudged Kathy and she looked over. "That's Vanessa," she said. "And that's Brenda." Brenda recognized Kathy because she saw that Kathy said on Facebook that she believes Dennis is responsible. Brenda seemed eager to explain her side of the story. She insisted that she and Dennis had fully cooperated with police after Andrea's disappearance. She presented a binder full of notes and missing persons flyers as proof. She recounted sightings of Andrea. It was clear she still believed that the teenager had run away. According to Carl, when he brought up Dennis' criminal record, Brenda replied, "Haven't forgotten what he did, but I do forgive him. I take my marriage vows very seriously." After the conference, Kathy hired a private investigator named Jeffrey Floor. He managed to get his hands on Andrea's police file, which Kathy and Carl had never seen. Oddly, the earliest documents in it were from March of 1989 when Andrea disappeared. They were dated 4 months earlier. That was when police responded to allegations of abuse in the Bowman home. The report did not go into detail about what happened, noting only that local authorities had determined that the allegations were not true. Carl and Kathy were sure that law enforcement had missed something. In 2017, Kathy and Carl met up with Chris Haverdink, the detective who'd taken over Andrea's case. Haverdink agreed that Bowman was suspicious, but that wasn't enough to arrest him. On November 22nd of 2019, Dennis Bowman was arrested by the Allegan County Sheriff's Office, but not because of anything to do with Andrea. He'd been arrested in relation to a crime committed 9 years before Andrea disappeared, more than 800 miles away from the shores of Lake Michigan. Bowman was arrested because he apparently took the life of Kathleen Doyle in 1980. 25-year-old Kathleen had been stripped gagged, strangled with an electrical cord, then assaulted and stabbed. Investigators collected male DNA from her body, but had few leads until Henry Lee Lucas was arrested in 1983. Lucas claimed that he and a partner named Otis Toole were responsible. His confessions were later revealed to be false and the charges were dropped. Eventually, science caught up with the case. Genetic genealogy, which compares unidentified DNA with a huge number of samples stored in databases, was becoming a very popular way of investigating these cold cases. Norfolk investigators partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a leader in the field, to test the DNA collected at Kathleen's crime scene. Soon, based on genealogical research, they had a list of more than 30 suspects. In 2019, after some more testing and police work, it led investigators to Dennis Bowman. Bowman was extradited to Virginia to stand trial. By then, he had already confessed. He admitted to entering Kathleen Doyle's home through a back window. He claimed that he was drunk and that it was an attempted robbery. He said he didn't expect to find Kathleen in the house and that he didn't plan to take her life. But she was in the house and he did take her life. At the time, Bowman was in Norfolk for his annual 2-week service in the Navy Reserve. He was also out of jail on bond. He was awaiting trial for the attempted assault of the 19-year-old Holland woman, the one he fired a gun at before she escaped on her bike. Kathy learned that she'd inadvertently played a role in solving Kathleen Doyle's case. Jeffrey Floor, a private detective, told her that at some point the Bowmans had visited the Allegan County Sheriff's Office to report Kathy for harassment. They claimed she was making defamatory accusations about Dennis online. Investigators offered Dennis a bottle of water and kept it when he left. According to Floor, that was how his DNA came into their possession. In the first week of February of 2020, with a thick layer of snow blanketing the ground, police returned to the Bowmans' property. There was a forensics team on site this time with a crime scene tent and dogs in the backyard. Officials appeared to be concentrating on one area in particular and they had started to dig. Later that day, the police held a press conference. They announced that human skeletal remains had been found and that they likely belonged to Andrea Bowman. The police needed to confirm that it was in fact Andrea. Kathy provided her DNA immediately. In March of 2020, almost 31 years to the day after Andrea disappeared, the results came back. There was a DNA match. Dennis claimed that what happened to Andrea was an accident. He said that they were arguing and he slapped her, causing her to fall and break her neck. He reported her missing to cover it up. That was the story that he told Brenda in correspondence from prison. In June of 2020, Dennis received 2 life sentences plus 20 years for taking the life of Kathleen Doyle. He was legally ordered to serve his time in Michigan, where he would stand trial for what he did to Andrea. The first hearing was held in February of 2021. Brenda took the stand first. She tearfully recounted how she'd made missing persons posters because she really believed that Andrea had run away. She said she learned the truth only after Dennis was arrested in the Kathleen Doyle case. When she was asked whether Andrea had ever accused Dennis of abusing her, Brenda said yes, but that she didn't believe the allegations were true. That's a lie, she told Andrea, and you know it. It was Brenda who told police where to find Andrea's remains. In a call from prison, Dennis had confessed to burying their daughter in the backyard. Brenda said she didn't believe him at first. They hadn't lived in their house in Hamilton when Andrea's life was taken, so how could he have buried her there? To Brenda's horror, Dennis explained that he'd moved their daughter's body to the new property as soon as they signed papers for it. The cement slab in the yard was the headstone of a grave that Brenda never even knew was there, in the shadow of the house she and Dennis shared for nearly 30 years. He didn't lie this time, Brenda told the detective when Andrea's remains were found. He didn't lie. As other witnesses took the stand, Dennis sat quietly in a green shirt, bow tie, and face mask. On December 22, 2021, Bowman pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to an additional 35 to 50 years in prison for taking Andrea Bowman's life. Bowman confessed to an assault from 1979. The crime was featured on the front page in the Holland Sentinel published October 18, 1979. The article detailed a very violent attack on a 27-year-old woman who early on a Sunday morning was bound, gagged, and assaulted by an intruder in her home. The perpetrator took cash before fleeing the scene and was described as a white man between 25 and 30 years old with sandy hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was estimated at 5 feet 6 inches, 150 pounds, and according to the young woman, her assailant was wearing a leather jacket and dark pants. The newspaper published a police sketch of the suspect, his ink-blotted pupils staring blankly from the front page. According to the lead detective in the case, there had been a recent uptick in reports of prowlers in the neighborhood where the crime had occurred. Police suspected that the attacker might have committed other crimes. This potentially means that there are a lot more cases that could be tied to Bowman. For those wondering, the Racine County Jane Doe was later identified as Peggy Johnson. Peggy was never reported missing. She was last seen at a homecoming dance in Harvard, Illinois in 1994. Most people who knew her assumed that she had just run away. An aunt worried enough to take out a classified ad in the paper. But nobody seemed to suspect that something terrible might have happened to the auburn-haired girl. Peggy disappeared shortly after her mother passed away, the sole parent in her low-income household. The 19-year-old found herself orphaned and homeless with a developmental disability that made it difficult for her to get a job. By chance, she met a nurse named Linda LaRoche who offered her work as a live-in housekeeper and nanny to her children. The teenager jumped at the opportunity. But over the next 5 years, LaRoche abused Peggy Johnson, beating her, starving her, and forcing her to live in a crawlspace. The violence culminated in 1999 when LaRoche allegedly ended 23-year-old Peggy's life and dumped her body in Raymond, Washington. No one could identify her, so she became known by the place where she was found, the Racine County Jane Doe. 20 years after Peggy's life was taken, Wisconsin police received a tip from a concerned citizen about a nurse who confessed to taking someone's life who worked for her in the late 1990s. In early November of 2019, Racine County authorities announced both Peggy's identity and LaRoche's arrest. In May of 2022, a judge in Racine County sentenced Linda LaRoche to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was also given an additional 5-year sentence for hiding Peggy's body. Peggy's step-aunt, Jenny Schroeder, had this to say to LaRoche: "I hope you have a slow, miserable time in your cage." Wayne Pratt. Wayne Pratt, a 24-year-old man, worked as an operator at the Anco gas station on U.S. Highway 41 in Winnebago, Wisconsin, located about 60 miles southwest of Green Bay. Known for his kind and gentle nature, Wayne was deeply loved by those around him, particularly his wife, Marie Pratt, to whom he was a devoted and loving husband. The evening of June 12, 1963, would take an unexpected and tragic turn in Wayne's life. That night, the peaceful rhythm of his everyday routine was shattered, triggering a series of events that would leave his family and the community reeling. What started as just another shift at the gas station soon turned into a night of fear and uncertainty, changing Wayne's life forever. As the evening wore on, the small town of Winnebago remained unaware of the looming tragedy at the Anko station. Wayne had been at home, unwinding and watching TV. A typical night until about 8:40 p.m., when the sound of a car pulling into the station interrupted his evening. Always attentive and willing to help, Wayne stepped outside and made his way toward the station, assuming the driver needed fuel or assistance. He had no reason to think that this encounter would be anything other than routine. As time passed and Wayne did not return home, his wife, Marie, grew increasingly anxious. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and her concern deepened. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Marie decided to head to the gas station herself, hoping to find Wayne busy with a late customer. However, nothing could have prepared her for the horror she was about to uncover. Upon arriving at the Anko gas station, which was usually bustling with activity, Marie found the scene eerily quiet. Her heart raced as she entered the building, and her worst fears came to life when she discovered Wayne's lifeless body in the back room. He was covered with a blanket, a sight that brought the grim reality crashing down. The man she loved and had spent her life with was gone. Overcome with grief and disbelief, Marie immediately called the police, her voice shaking as she reported the tragedy. When authorities arrived, Marie recounted the horrific details of how she had found her husband. As the investigation into Wayne Pratt's death began, the full extent of the violence he endured became chillingly apparent. Wayne had been stabbed 53 times, a brutal act of violence that left even the most experienced investigators stunned. The sheer number of wounds pointed to an intense rage and personal vendetta, making the crime all the more baffling. Yet, despite the savage nature of the attack, a glimmer of hope emerged. Evidence was left behind, blood that did not belong to Wayne. This discovery suggested that Wayne's assailant had also been injured during the violent struggle. The presence of the attacker's blood at the scene provided investigators with a crucial lead, hinting that the person had left behind a trace of their identity. However, despite this promising clue, the investigation quickly encountered significant challenges. No further details about how the events unfolded that night could be uncovered, leaving many questions unanswered. As the months turned into years, the trail grew colder. Investigators exhausted every lead, but the case remained frustratingly stagnant. With no arrests made and no new evidence coming to light, Wayne Pratt's case began to slip from the forefront of public attention. The case, once a priority, slowly transitioned into a cold case, as the initial burst of investigative activity failed to yield any significant breakthroughs. By the time the late 1960s arrived, the investigation had stalled almost entirely. With limited resources and no new leads, law enforcement had little choice but to scale back their efforts. In February 2011, nearly 5 decades after Wayne's life was brutally taken, the case was reopened as investigators sought to leverage advancements in forensic science to find new leads. With DNA technology now more sophisticated, the hope was that re-examining the evidence might finally reveal the identity of Wayne's perpetrator. Investigators focused on the blanket found covering Wayne's body, knowing that any genetic material left behind could provide the breakthrough they needed. By February 2009, Left Behind could provide the breakthrough they needed. By 2015, their efforts seemed to be paying off. Sorensen Forensics, a leading forensic testing company, identified DNA mixtures on the blanket, a promising development that brought new life to the investigation. However, the mixed nature of the DNA samples complicated matters, preventing authorities from entering the information into national databases to search for a match. The investigation stalled once again as the inability to isolate a clear profile left investigators at a frustrating standstill. 3 years later, however, the case took a significant turn. In 2018, a warrant was issued for the arrest of William Dockstader, an 82-year-old man from Buller, Wisconsin. Dockstader had been on the radar of investigators since 1963, when he was initially identified as a suspect in the days following Wayne's demise. Tips about his potential involvement resurfaced in 1968 and again in 2022, keeping him in the periphery of the investigation for decades. But it was not until 2023 that new DNA technology provided the evidence needed to conclusively link Dockstader to the crime. In 2023, Sorensen Forensics re-examined the DNA evidence using the latest technology, while cybergenetics employed true allele data analysis to sift through the complex DNA mixtures. The analysis revealed on July 16, 2024 that Doxator's DNA was statistically identical to the DNA found on the blanket that covered Wayne's body. This breakthrough, though bittersweet, finally provided the answer that investigators, Wayne's family, and the community had sought for over 61 years. Although William Doxator passed away in 2022 at the age of 82, the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office officially closed the cold case. The Winnebago County District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence and confirmed that, had Doxator been alive, there would have been enough grounds to charge him with the slaying. The resolution of the case provided a sense of closure to a decades-old mystery, even as the memory of Wayne Pratt's tragic death continued to linger in the minds of those who had lived through it. Moving on to the next case. Valerie Ames. For nearly 28 years, the family of 31-year-old Valerie Ames from Jacksonville, Florida, searched for answers after her brutal death. Valerie was found in her apartment on King Street on August 10, 1996, stabbed and beaten to death. She had been discovered by a woman who had gone to check on her father's apartment while he was in jail. Upon opening the unlocked door, she stumbled upon Valerie's lifeless body in a pool of blood. Despite extensive investigations over the years, the case remained unsolved until recent technological advancements and tireless efforts from detectives finally led to a breakthrough and the arrest of a suspect in the case. Valerie Ames was a devoted mother to two young daughters, aged 5 and 9. The devastating news of her tragic demise reached her daughters and their grandmother while they were in England, shattering their world. When police arrived at the scene at the Courtyard Apartments on 1606 King Street in Jacksonville's Riverside area, they were told by the apartment's residents that they did not know Valerie, but that she seemed vaguely familiar. Despite their initial confusion, the discovery of Valerie's lifeless body in her apartment marked the beginning of a long and arduous search for justice, one that would span nearly 3 decades before any substantial leads or arrests were made. Valerie Ames lived and worked in Arlington, and it was unusual for her to travel across town, especially without a car. None of her friends or family recalled giving her a ride to the Riverside area on the day of her tragic demise. Her daughter, Michelle James, later shared a troubling detail. 3 months prior to Valerie's death, Valerie had reported being assaulted by a police officer. However, after the initial contact with authorities, Valerie's cooperation in the case began to waver and no charges were filed. This incident, though not leading to immediate action, added a layer of complexity to the investigation into Valerie's death, leaving her family wondering if there might have been a connection between the two events. That officer was looked at following Valerie's slaying, but he was cleared. According to Michelle, people have told her and her sister that their mother was pregnant at the time of her demise. But law enforcement says there is nothing in the case filed to indicate that. A woman allegedly contacted the police informing them that she had information on Valerie's case and would make a deal with the police. Not too long after she contacted the police, the woman was found deceased. Michelle remembers her mother with love. She said she was a wonderful woman. I was very young at the time, but I remember she had the face of an angel and a heart of gold. She always did the best she could for me and my sister. Michelle's last memory of her mother was at her 5th birthday party, a Barney-themed event. She remembers her mother giving her a Barney stuffed animal. Michelle said, "You see, people get upset with their mothers and do not treat them great. They do not realize how much they take having a mother for granted. My mom missed out on birthday parties and being with her grandkids, and we all will never get to experience them together." Valerie loved animals, especially horses. She loved to go horseback riding. When she visited Texas, horseback riding was always on her to-do list. She also really liked camping and dancing. It was one of her favorite things to do. As a child, she performed ballet. Valerie's demise had a life-altering impact on Michelle's sister and grandmother. They were both very close to Valerie and were heartbroken by the loss. A few months following the slaying, the grandmother was so heartbroken and worried that they all ended up moving out of Jacksonville. Valerie's family stayed positive and optimistic that her case will one day be solved. The The family's only hope was to find who was responsible for her demise. Just the name of the perpetrator would bring them some closure. Detective Harmony Brooks said in 2018 that there were more than 24 pieces of evidence she planned to retest for DNA. Valerie's case was featured in November 2018 on the Unsolved series, aired by First Coast News in Jacksonville, Florida. On April 2, 2024, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office 4th Judicial Circuit announced an arrest in the 1996 case. Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters announced that 69-year-old Jerry Phillips was arrested in Johnson County, North Carolina, and is facing charges in Valerie's slaying. Sheriff Waters declined to elaborate on what led investigators to Phillips, but said it involved technological advancements and pointed investigators to one person. Phillips was booked into the Duval County Jail on April 19th and is being charged with battery and second-degree slaying. Michelle said in a statement after the arrest, "Standing here today at almost 28 years later, we now have some answers on our beautiful mother, Valerie. And she has finally reached her chance to have justice. Her voice can finally be heard, and we want nothing but that justice." Valerie Ames' family can now find some measure of peace knowing that after nearly 28 years, her case has been solved. Thanks to the relentless work of the Jacksonville Cold Case Department and Project Cold Case, they finally have the name of the person responsible for the brutal crime, Jerry Phillips. For her children, grandchildren, and loved ones, this is a moment of relief and justice, as they can now say goodbye to the uncertainty that has haunted them for decades. May Valerie's memory be honored, and may her family finally find the peace they so deeply deserve. Moving on to the next case. Marlene Warren. When a clown appeared at Marlene Warren's door with flowers and balloons, she had no idea that the clown was carrying a gun hidden inside the costume. For over 30 years, the case of the killer clown baffled detectives, Florida residents, and true crime enthusiasts alike. Marlene Warren was born on April 15, 1950. At the age of 22, she married Michael Warren, who was 19 at the time. Marlene already had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Michael appeared to embrace her sons as his own. The couple worked hard and built a life together, purchasing several businesses, including a used car dealership for Michael. Their efforts allowed them to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, and they were able to afford a 6,500 square foot home in Wellington, Florida's upscale Aero Club neighborhood. Each home in this community had its own runway and hangar, offering residents the freedom to fly their private aircraft at will. The Warrens appeared to have it all, yet this was not the case at all. At his auto dealership in 1983, Michael experienced legal troubles. Customers accused him of fiddling with the odometer, and the authorities arrested him. He was consequently given an 18-month probationary period. By the year 1990, it was widely known that the Warrens were experiencing marital issues. Michael was allegedly having an affair with Sheila Keene, one of his employees. Despite their denials, Sheila's husband eventually left her. On May 26, 1990, a white Chrysler LeBaron without a license plate drove down the street where Michael and Marlene lived. Marlene and a friend were in the kitchen when they saw a person dressed as a clown, holding a basket of flowers and balloons, approaching their front door. Marlene grew up in a family that had a deep love for clowns. Her family adored clowns so much that her mother had a room dedicated to clown collectibles, including paintings Marlene had made when she was just 14. With this deep connection to clowns, Marlene eagerly went to the front door to greet her visitor. Her son, Joseph Aarons, who was there at the time, recalled hearing his mother comment, "How pretty," as she opened the door. Those would appear to be her last words. Shortly after, everyone in the house, including Joseph's friends who were visiting, heard a loud pop sound. At first they thought the noise was a balloon popping, but then they noticed Marlene tumbling to the ground. Now at alert, everyone sped to the door. The balloons and flowers were left behind as the clown nonchalantly made his way back to the white Chrysler LeBaron. Joseph tried to run after the clown, but he couldn't go as far because he had a cast on his leg. He, however, remembered screaming at the clown to turn around. The clown turned and gave him a wide-eyed brown stare. His face lacked any expression. The clown soon climbed the white LeBron and sped off. The sole description offered by witnesses was that Marlene had been shot by a clown with brown eyes. Even the gender of the clown was a mystery to them. Joseph and one of his friends had tried to follow the clown in their own car, but they lost track of it. Marlene Warren was rushed to the hospital. It was determined that she had been shot twice in the face at point-blank range. She struggled to survive but died 2 days later at the hospital. Detectives checked in with Michael Warren, who wasn't home at the time of the incident. Michael had a solid alibi. He got the terrible news while en route to a Miami racetrack with France. He hastily went back home to offer comfort to the family. When questioned by the detectives, he provided as much information cooperating with the investigation process. He was soon ruled out as a suspect. The authorities were perplexed. According to a spokesman for the Palm Beach County Sheriff, the killer clown case was the strangest thing he had ever seen in all of his 19 years working as a law enforcement agent. 2 hours after the murder, authorities got a solid tip. A caller who wished to remain unnamed suggested that the police should thoroughly question Michael Warren and Sheila Keene. Before the police could ask her any more questions, she hung up. Sheila Keene was in town at the time of the murder, but Michael was traveling with France. Sheila claimed to have been at work, but in reality, she was a repoed person from Michael's dealership. Her alibi wasn't exactly solid. A few days after Marlene Warren's killer clown case made headlines, 2 employees of the neighborhood costume store named the Spotlight reported a weird experience to the police. They claimed that one woman with chocolate brown hair came up to them just as they were to lock up the store. She pleaded to be allowed inside. The employees informed her that they were closed and advised her to come back the following day. She, however, was persistent and informed them that she really needed a costume that evening. It was a strange request because it wasn't Halloween. It was almost Labor Day weekend. Regardless, the 2 employees were sympathetic and allowed her enter the store. She was claimed to have bought white makeup, a red nose, white gloves, an orange afro wig, and a clown outfit. Later on in the investigation, the 2 employees selected Sheila Keene from a lineup of photos and declared that they were fairly certain that she was the woman who showed up begging to buy a clown costume. The detective soon looked into the supermarket store that sold the flowers and balloons the clown had brought to Marlene's house. It was discovered that the supermarket was close to Sheila Keene's house at the time. Also, the supermarket staff selected Sheila from a lineup of photos. The white Chrysler LeBaron, the getaway vehicle, came into consideration next. When asked, Michael Warren asserted that he had no knowledge of the vehicle. He claimed only Chevrolets were sold at his dealership, but Payless, his main rival, had a Chrysler LeBaron. Michael and Payless had a history of disagreements, especially over an advertisement that Michael's dealership ran that included the phrase Payless and was purported to be an attempt to confuse buyers. One time, a client from outside the area rented a white Chrysler LeBaron from Palace. The customer searched up Palace's number when it was time to return the car, but ended up contacting Michael's dealership instead. The client said they were instructed to park the vehicle outside the dealership with the keys inside the sun visor. The LeBaron, however, later vanished. After the murder, the getaway vehicle used by the clown was abandoned in a grocery store parking lot. During their search, police discovered orange synthetic threads in the vehicle that resembled a clown wig strands. They also discovered brown long hairs. Sheila Keene had long brown hair at the time of the murder. The police found more orange fake hair strands inside her residence during a search warrant. At this point, everything seemed like a simple situation to resolve, but that wasn't the case. Michael and Sheila vehemently denied being involved in Marlene's murder. They refuted having a conversation with the police without the presence of a lawyer. DNA testing was just getting started in 1990, so the investigators' available evidence was circumstantial. The investigation into Marlene's murder was abandoned, but Michael's legal issues intensified. During the course of the investigation into the murder, Michael's unlawful business dealings came to light. Police discovered proof of additional odometer tampering and consumer overcharging. Following the arrest of an employee, Michael surrendered himself to the police. In 1992, Michael's case went to trial and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After being released in February 2002, Michael married Sheila Keene a few years later. The couple started a new life in Tennessee by operating a restaurant. Sheila changed her name to Debbie and informed the community that it was a childhood nickname. Michael must be a good businessman because his new restaurant was a success. The couple's success allowed them to settle in Heron Point, a posh neighborhood close to the Virginia-Tennessee border. They made lots of friends and fit in well with their new neighbors. Few locals were familiar with their history. Michael told their new community that he has owned restaurants since he was a teenager. Marlene Warren's demise benefited Michael as well. He was the beneficiary of Marlene's life insurance policy, not her son. He took over $50,000 from Marlene's family, leaving them with virtually nothing. Detectives had their suspicions, but there was no concrete proof on ground. Michael and Sheila were immediately suspected of the crime, but a grand jury was never convened to that effect. Earlier in the investigation, the police were informed by Michael's acquaintances that they had seen arguments between him and Marlene, and that Marlene had questioned Sheila about her and Michael's affair. Above all, they claimed Michael didn't seem overly saddened by Marlene's passing. Detectives knew they merely needed to fit the puzzle pieces together because there were many of them. DNA was the case's linchpin. Police took blood and hair samples from Sheila in 1990, but they lacked the equipment to analyze them. Over 25 years passed as the samples rested in a cooler. Police were able to reactivate Marlene Warren's cold case in 2013, thanks to a federal grant they were able to obtain. They had previously tried DNA testing, but the results were inconclusive. Fortunately, technology has improved and produced sufficient evidence to charge Sheila for Marlene's murder. In September 2017, Michael and Sheila were stopped by authorities 5 minutes away from their home. They were unaware that Marlene Warren's cold case had been reopened. 27 years after the murder, the police informed them that an arrest warrant had been issued for Sheila Keene Warren. Michael Warren still maintains that neither he nor Sheila are involved. In an interview, when questioned if he was involved in the killing of his first wife, Michael replied with definitely not. He further said he wouldn't have been with Sheila if he thought she had anything to do with Marlene's murder. A lawyer named Christopher DeSantis told detectives about a fascinating chat he had with Michael Warren before Marlene was killed. DeSantis claimed that Michael had questioned him about what would happen theoretically speaking if a husband murdered his wife. He recalled telling Michael that the husband would escape punishment if a friend of his committed the murder, and there was no way to connect the husband to the friend. Interestingly, DeSantis also remembered telling Michael that if someone were dressed as a clown, they would likely get away with it because it would be impossible to identify them. However, despite this statement, the evidence was not enough for the police to accuse Michael Warren of his wife Marlene's murder. Marlene's son, Joseph Aarons, who was a teenager when his mother was killed, recalled that day as one of the worst of his life. In an interview, he expressed a desire for justice but refrained from stating whether he believed his stepfather, Michael, was involved in his mother's death. Sheila was incarcerated for 5 years before her trial began. During this time, she and Michael's relationship continued, with the two exchanging several letters. Ultimately, Sheila Keene pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Amy Milwich. Amy Milwich, known to everyone around her as a bright, adventurous girl, was full of promise. She lived in Bay Village, Ohio, a peaceful suburb on the shores of Lake Erie. Amy had a love for the natural world and a talent for athletics, making her a standout in her community. Unfortunately, her life was tragically cut short by an unsolved kidnapping and murder that left her family, friends, and the entire region in search of answers. Amy was born Amy Renee Miljevic on December 11, 1978, in Little Rock, Arkansas, to Mark and Margaret Miljevic. She had an older brother named Jason, who was 3 years her senior. In 1984, the family moved to Bay Village, Ohio, seeking a quieter and more fulfilling life in the Midwest. Bay Village, with its middle-class charm and wholesome environment, seemed like the perfect place to raise their children. It offered a sense of safety and comfort, making it an ideal community for many looking for a slice of the American dream. In Bay Village, Ohio, the community was tightly knit and trusted. The streets were considered safe, and it was common for families to keep their doors unlocked and let their children roam freely, particularly during the warm summer months. The Milojevics, new to the area, quickly embraced this lifestyle. Mark worked for General Motors, while Margaret was employed at Trading Times magazine. Their children, Jason and Amy, settled into the local school system without trouble. With a population of just 17,000, Bay Village was a peaceful and welcoming town, when newcomers were embraced with open arms. As Amy grew, she developed a wide array of interests, but none more passionate than her love for animals. Horses, in particular, captured her imagination, and she dreamed of one day owning her own or running a stable filled with her favorite breed. Her enthusiasm for animals expanded into a broader appreciation for the natural world, and Amy often ventured outdoors, exploring the town with a sense of adventure. Her vivid imagination allowed her to create stories and fantasy worlds, which she eagerly shared with others. At school, Amy's outgoing and friendly nature made her many friends, and she quickly became a beloved classmate. Amy's vibrant personality and boundless energy made her a magnetic presence among her peers. She thrived in social environments, always sharing her excitement and curiosity with those around her. Academically, she excelled, following in her brother's footsteps with a natural aptitude for learning. When she wasn't studying, Amy participated in various athletic activities, especially swimming, which she pursued with dedication. She approached life with an adventurous spirit, eager to try anything that came her way. Her father, Mark, once remarked that Amy was the type of child who would push away help just to figure things out on her own, whether it was learning how to tie her shoes or tackling any challenge life presented. Despite her outgoing nature, Amy was somewhat reserved when it came to interacting with adults. While she had a close bond with her mother, Margaret, and would engage politely with others, she didn't seek out conversations with adults outside of her immediate family and school. This reserved attitude only added to the mystery and tragedy when her life took a dark turn. In the months leading up to her death, the once peaceful and trusting Bay Village would be consumed by fear. A series of phone calls, an abduction, and the unfolding of a sinister plot would tear apart the close-knit community, leaving residents reeling from the unimaginable. The following timeline will delve into the events that ultimately led to Amy's tragic death. In the days leading up to October 27, 1989, Amy received a mysterious phone call from an unknown man who told her that her mother, Margaret, had been promoted at work. The caller then suggested they meet at a shopping center near Bay Village Middle School to discuss this promotion. Amy, believing the call to be innocent and a kind gesture for her mother, casually shared the news with a few close friends at school. However, she didn't mention the phone call to her parents and acted normally at home. On the morning of Friday, October 27th, Amy woke up early, excited for the weekend ahead. She told her mother she would be staying late after school for a fifth-grade choir audition, and as usual, she left for school on her bicycle at around 7:20 a.m. Her brother Jason had already left before her, so Amy was alone on her ride. Throughout the school day, from the time classes began until dismissal at 2:04 p.m., Amy seemed perfectly normal, displaying no signs of distress or worry. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. 11 minutes pass by and Amy walks down the street from the middle school to the shopping center on the corner of Wolf Road and Dover Center. Ironically, just across the street from the local police department. At 2:15 p.m., Amy is seen in the shopping center plaza by fellow classmates, who are all hanging around in after-school recreational tradition. Somewhere between 2:20 and 2:30 p.m., Amy is approached by an adult white male of about 30 years, standing around 5'9" and sporting brown hair. This is the last confirmed sighting of Amy, as she is abducted and disappears from plain sight along with the adult's male figure. 40 minutes later, following the family rule that required the children to call Margaret when they returned home from school, Jason phoned his mother at 3:14 p.m. to inform her that Amy hadn't come home yet. This was unusual, as Amy always returned by 3 p.m. Margaret reassured Jason that Amy was likely still at her choir audition, but she couldn't shake the growing concern. At 3:30 p.m., Jason called again to say that Amy still hadn't arrived. Margaret's worry increased, but just as she was about to gather her things to head to work, she received another call from Amy. Margaret asked how the audition had gone, and Amy replied simply, "Okay." Margaret then asked how Amy was doing, and Amy answered, "Fine." The conversation was brief, but with no cause for alarm, Margaret resumed preparing for work, assuming her daughter was home and safe. This would be the last confirmed communication anyone had with Amy. As the hours passed, an unsettling feeling lingered in Margaret's heart. She recalled the strangely short responses from Amy, which was out of character for her typically talkative daughter. Trusting her instincts, Margaret quickly packed up and rushed out to her car. At around 5:30 p.m., she arrived home to find Amy still missing. Without hesitation, Margaret began calling Amy's friends and neighbors, desperately seeking any information or sightings. Unable to locate her, Margaret hops in the car and retraces her daughter's steps from earlier that day, leading her back to the Bay Village Middle School, where she finds Amy's bicycle still chained to the bike rack outside the building. At 5:58 p.m., Margaret takes matters out of her own hands and visits the Bay Village Police Department reporting Amy missing. A couple of officers take notes, ask questions, and put out a bulletin to alert other authorities of the issue. By 7 p.m. that evening, Mark returns home from General Motors and aids in the search for his daughter. Joining him are countless Bay Village citizens forming search parties and canvassing the streets of their once innocent little lake town. 2 hours later, at 9 p.m., the Bay Village Police Department, BVPD, became the hub for one of the most rapidly organized volunteer search efforts in northern Ohio's history. Early the next morning at 7:10 a.m. on Saturday, October 28th, the FBI arrived in Bay Village to assist in the investigation. Special Agent Dick Wren, a Bay Village resident with strong community ties, led the investigation. By the end of the morning, Wren and the local police learned from one of Amy's schoolmates about her phone conversations with an unidentified man. It became clear to investigators that the abduction was not a random act, but rather a carefully planned event. The schoolmate revealed that the man had known Amy's phone numbers, her home address, her mother's employer, and even the time she would be coming home. He was familiar with the area and was able to earn the trust of even the most cautious children. This was no random kidnapping. The man responsible was highly calculated and dangerous. As night fell on Saturday, October 28th, longtime Bay Village resident Howard Kimball took charge of the volunteer search efforts, setting up his own command post above City Hall and managing calls and tips from the community. The search quickly grew into the largest organized effort in Ohio since the 1951 disappearance of Beverly Potts. As the weekend came to an end, investigators grew increasingly concerned that their prime window of opportunity was closing. In cases of missing children, the initial hours are the most critical, and without any concrete evidence, authorities feared that the worst was yet to come. Over the next 100 days, nothing of use is uncovered. Amy's profile is shared about the world across multiple television programs and in various platforms, and yet no one comes forward with anything of substance. The next big find wouldn't come until the early morning hours of Thursday, February 8, 1990, and the worst possible scenario unfolds. At around 7 a.m., a female jogger running alongside County Road 1181 in New London of rural Ashland County, Ohio notices what appears to be a body or a lump of clothes resting in a field near her pathway. Authorities are called and quickly respond only to discover the body belongs to Amy Miljevic in a spot nearly 50 miles from where she was last seen 3.5 months prior. Near the crime scene are a blanket and shower curtain covered in Amy's family dark hair. By 1:40 p.m. later that afternoon, Amy's body undergoes an autopsy by the coroner. The coroner rules Amy's death a clear homicide via multiple stab wounds to the neck and blunt force trauma to the head. They also discover Amy had at least one meal before her death, which most likely occurred only days after her abduction. Of all the mysteries presented by the discovery of Amy's body, one thing remains certain. An innocent young girl was murdered in cold blood and a killer is on the loose. For the next 3 decades, a massive manhunt for the Lake Erie murderer burns on, led by Bay Village detectives and the FBI. In February 6th, law enforcement learns that a few other girls in the city of Northern Olmsted, Ohio received similar calls from an unidentified male figure at around the time Amy received hers, or similar setups to the one that led to Amy's abduction. None of these girls had gone through with the scheme. However, it signals to police that they are dealing with a serial predator rather than a one-off criminal. After another 7 years of inconclusive investigating, the case brings aboard Special Agent Phil Torsney, known for his role in capturing the infamous gangster. Whitey Bulgran tells reporters the killer was most a long-time resident of northern Ohio with in-depth knowledge of the local geography. Fast forward another 7 years to present day, and authorities are still without any luck or noteworthy leads in 2020. Last year, investigators claimed that whoever is responsible is most likely not even on their list of suspects at this point due to how exhaustively thorough they've been looking into the names they've come up with. Over 15,000 interviews, 150 suspects, and 8,000 clues later, and Amy's death is still up in the air, frozen in a cloud of anguish, despair, and tragedy. When it comes to clues in Amy Mihaljevic's case file, nothing major catches the eye as a big break in the investigation. Unfortunately, the era in which Amy perished was a time before detailed phone records were kept, and thus the location of the phone used by the suspect to converse with Amy, as well as the line Amy called from to tell her mother she was safe, cannot be identified. Had Amy been abducted a few years later, the shopping center in which she made contact with her kidnapper probably would have had CCTV monitoring systems installed that might have captured a better image of the suspects. Remember that Bay Village was thought to be as secure as a small community could be, and those types of measures were never even at the back of citizens' minds. All that being said, there are a few clues and missing artifacts sprinkled throughout the case that are worth magnification. Instead of one major piece of evidence or suspicious pattern, we want to bring awareness to the smaller details that could make the biggest difference. First of all, there were 3 significant items missing from Amy's person the day that her body was found in the field along County Road 1181. These personal artifacts were a pair of black horse riding boots, a denim backpack with an academic binder inside and the slogan "Best in Class" written on the clasp, and a pair of turquoise earrings shaped like horse heads. These items were unique enough to make an impression on Amy's parents and distinguishable enough for the general public to be on the lookout for. Distinguishable enough for the general public to be on the lookout for. Detectives assigned to the investigation remarked about how predators in these types of crimes often keep mementos of their victims like twisted trophies to keep for themselves. All of these missing objects could easily have been held onto by the killer as mementos. If any were found and identified, it could be a connection to Amy. The other peculiar point of interest wasn't covered in February, when multiple other girls came forward to investigators sharing similar stories of phone conversations with a man who wanted to buy them gifts for their mothers and meet up at shopping malls. These girls were also residents of northern Ohio suburbia in a town called North Olmsted, a neighboring community with Bay Village. While these girls were not friends with Amy directly, all of them had one conclusive connection to the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center. Detectives looked into the pattern and realized that the center utilized a visitor's log booth at the front door, which all of the girls, including Amy, will have signed upon their trips there. Along with signatures, the logbooks also included visitors' phone numbers and addresses, giving the predator an in-depth resource for his potential victim's location. How many logbooks the center kept throughout their history, and if they are archived, is unknown. Sadly, the discovery wasn't made until 17 years after Amy's murder, and thus going back and pinpointing suspects from any documents kept is nearly impossible. And if it was carried out, no leads were brought forth from it by authorities. However, we bring it up because it seems more than likely the perpetrator used the visitor log and possibly the center itself to find young women. If you have any information regarding the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center over the past 30 years that could be deemed relevant, it's important to reach out to proper officials. Or if you've heard of any similar instances of the phone calls being made in northern Ohio, it could lead to the best chance of finding the serial criminal. Now we turn to the theories surrounding Amy's murder. As with many missing and murdered children's cases, one of the oft-argued theories in the beginning of an investigation is the targeting of the parents and their potential involvement. Fortunately, in Amy's case, Authorities were able to quickly rule out both Mark and Margaret Milhoich as suspects. They had both rock-solid alibis as they were both at work and around co-workers. Some conspiracy theorists have tried to reason the parents might hire someone or convince a man to kidnap their daughter. But the truth of the matter was that Amy's parents had nothing to gain from carrying out such a bizarre scheme. It is a desperate hypothesis based on grasping at straws and should be put to rest for good. However, many of the other early theories did revolve around friends and family members close to the Milojevic family. These were the people most likely to have the knowledge of Margaret's employment situation as well as Amy's after-school routine and the telephone number to her residence. They would know of Amy's deep-rooted connection with her mother and her absolute will to do anything to make her happy. A child's compassion is usually seen and taken advantage of by people close to them, not by strangers or bystanders out to commit random crimes. Sadly, any and all of the possible persons of interest closely connected to the Mihalevics were intensely vetted by both the local police and the FBI special agents, and none are currently considered prime suspects. But there were a few promising individuals discovered by investigators through the first few years after Amy's body was found. The first was a former stable hand at Holly Hills Farms where Amy would ride horses for recreation. His name was Sean Tabelian, who also went by Sean Dusky. Sean was kicked out of a previous labor position at a stables for tickling young girls, and he was accused of raping a 12-year-old girl in Washington state in 1983. And another person connected via Holly Hills Farms was Dr. Gregory Capella, whose daughter also rode horses alongside Amy. He faced accusations of writing love letters to a female minor asking to be her boyfriend, and would sleep in the same room as young girls when taking the youth soccer teams on trips to Canada. Both of the Holly Hills Farms men profiled only had circumstantial suspicions at best and were never arrested. Another set of suspects would arise due to their involvement with Amy's memorial events held around Bay Village soon after she disappeared. The first was Robert Jones, who attended a memorial service and handed Margaret $1,000 in cash. He didn't know the Mokolovic family on a personal level, making the kind transaction a bit odd. When investigators looked into Roberts, they discovered a pattern of strange behavior, such as his infamy around town for standing nude in front of the living room window as young girls walked by or simply staring at them as they ventured to school. He was also suspected of arson when the home he lived in burned down in 1989. But when the FBI obtained a search warrant to dig through his new home, nothing of note could be found. The other peculiar subjects targeted by police after Amy's memorial was an unnamed man featured in former FBI agent Robert Ressler's book, Whoever Fights Monsters. Ressler claimed the man went out of his way to volunteer in search efforts for Amy, handing out flyers and going door to door. The man also sent Margaret sympathy cards with hair pins attached telling Margaret that she and Amy would wear them when Amy was found. Thinking it to be a sign of involvement, Ressler and another FBI agent visited the man to thank him for his volunteer efforts before turning it into an interrogation. The man professed his innocence, but the police kept checking in on him. They found he had a history of mental and emotional issues and felt that they had found their man. Their gut reaction seemed to be validated when the man combined a lethal dosage of ethanol with his soda just weeks after Amy's body was found. After the man's suicide, Ressler and the FBI attempted to search his residence. But before they could act, the man's family had already cleaned and emptied the house, even donating his clothing to a Goodwill store. Years later, local police told investigators that the unidentified man in question had very little evidence linking him to Amy's case and was never seriously considered as a suspect. Despite having access to his belongings, no useful clues were found, and the man is no longer considered a prime suspect. In addition to this individual, there were a few other men in the Bay Village area who had disturbing histories involving minors and young girls, leading authorities to focus on them. One such person was Kenneth Robert Stanton, a serial molester who had moved to northern Ohio in 1989, just before Amy went missing. Stanton's modus operandi involved befriending young girls and learning when they would be home alone, gaining their trust before invading their homes. While police initially considered him a suspect because his behavior mirrored the potential actions of Amy's killer, there was no physical connection between him and her case. Another figure of interest was Dr. Frank Voken, a local Bay Village dentist known for making inappropriate advances toward female minors. Shortly after Amy's kidnapping, he moved out of the country, and those close to him reported that he had asked his family to send him updates on the fate of the missing girl. Despite these troubling behaviors, Vulcan's involvement remained speculative, and there was no concrete evidence linking him to Amy's disappearance either. What happened to Frank is unknown, but some say he had beaten his wife and fled to Costa Rica. One glaring problem with the investigation at large and a search for the perfect perpetrator is the fact that there are a disproportionate amount of registered sex offenders in the northern Ohio area, especially sprinkled around middle-class suburbs such as Bay Village and northern Olmsted. And if the list of known pedophiles and rapists is large, one can only imagine how big the list of unconfirmed and unknown criminals could be. Thus, the sheer number of names cycled through police reports and FBI investigations is too big to comprehend, let alone list with appropriate reason. If anything, this realization is all the more disturbing considering what happened to Amy may not be an isolated incident by a single serial predator with multiple victims, but rather a solo pedophile in the midst of countless others still out there carrying out their bidding in an uncontrolled circus of evil. Of all the men investigated, interviewed, and implicated in Amy's case, none stand out more than one suspicious figure researched by longtime journalist and expert on the case James Renner. In February, published an article for clevescene.co titled, quote, "Person of Interest detailing the history and his personal search for a man by the name of Dean Runkle." Dean Runkle wasn't just a character of the northern Ohio suburbs with vague connections to the Millowich family or a semi-shady past. Rather, Dean was the first and most prolific suspect intersecting with all of the girls who received strange calls from an unidentified male, and that he had worked as a volunteer at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center in 1989. But none of the former employees of the center had remembered his name until a man named Tom Paksinski called up Renner in February and told him his former 8th grade science teacher in 1991 named Dean Runkle would talk about the Lake Erie Science Center to his classes. This was the volunteer both Renner and the FBI wanted to investigate, and thus the profiling endeavor began. Dean Runkle was born in New London, Ohio on a farmhouse only a few miles away from where Amy's body would be found on the County Road 1181 45 years later. He lived a tumultuous early life dealing with an abusive father and the tragic death of his 6-year-old twin sister in 1950. Nevertheless, he went on to develop a love for science and biology and studied education at Bowling Green State University, finding employment soon after graduation as a 7th grade science instructor at Vermilion Junior High School in 1967, already earning awards for his work by the end of his 2nd year. And on the surface, these awards made sense. He was a colorful individual implementing film and photography with his students, yet this habit seemed to run deeper into his private life, as he would take the videos and photos of his students home to cut and develop the film in his own residence. When he wasn't teaching, Dean took time to play ragtime piano at venues around the country, including Disneyland. By the time he returned to teaching, Dean Runkle assembled a miniature conservatory in his classroom with various animals and creatures. This led him to involve his students even more outside of lectures, calling them his assistants and allowing them to spend time at his home after school and on weekends whilst tending to the animal equipment. All of that changed abruptly in 1987 when Dean quit his position citing health concerns yet never gave the same explanation to either parents or administrators. He moved back to New London and worked at a pet store delivering mice to nature centers around the area, including the Lake Erie Science Center. It didn't take long before Dean secured another teaching position at Nord Junior High School, where he built another miniature zoo students as his after-school assistants once more. He maintained this position until February 3rd when Dean quit out of the blue once again. This time Dean truly left without reason, forgoing a sabbatical, retirement, and his pension. Curious about Dean's personality and relationship with his students, Renner reached out to over 500 of his former middle schoolers, now adults in the real world. By all accounts, he heard back a lot of positive feedback regarding Dean's infectious energy, and how he inspired students to pursue degrees in biology or veterinary sciences. However, he also received a fair share of secrets revealing a darker side to Dean and a pattern of disturbing behavior. First were the stories of animal cruelty, like the time he pulled a prank on a friend by dipping a cat in liquid nitrogen, freezing it and letting it crash into a million pieces on the floor. Then there were the copious instances of creepy incidents with the kids. One girl was quoted by Renner in his article saying, quote, "It was more than creepy, it felt like an animal noticing you when you walk into a room." He had a few girls he was extra close to, like the girl who sat in front of me. I'd watch him put his left hand on her back and bend down to whisper in her ear. It seems inappropriate now the way he treated some of the girls. Another male student recalled Dean's propensity for telling jokes to the boys, going as far as to hint that he liked kids before they hit puberty because he was once, quote, a runt. Another former female student thought Dean was the closest match to a police sketch of Amy's kidnapper she had ever seen. She actually confronted him about it one day back in 1990 and told Renner, quote, I said, I know you're the one who killed Amy. His eyes popped out of his head. He didn't say anything, just walked past me. For years later, and another female student of his came forward with a disgusting revelation when she overheard Dean tell a fellow administrator he wished he was the father of a baby held by a pregnant 8th grader. And that wasn't all. Atkins said Dean gave off incredibly uncomfortable vibes when they were alone, that he made suggestive comments about the clothes female students would wear and be very touchy with them, pressing his chest against them when he spoke in close quarters. Atkins and a few other girls were interviewed about these behaviors by their superintendent a year later in 1995. But that investigation is nowhere in Dean's professional records. One of the most glaring pieces of evidence against Dean is an incident that occurred with another student of his in which they were caught alone in Dean's gold-covered Pontiac Grand Prix. Both the school's principal and the police were aware of the situation, but let Dean off with nothing more than a warning. It's incredibly peculiar looking back on it when considering the make and model of the vehicle itself. Amy Miljevic's body was found with microscopic gold fibers researched to be those of a General Motors automobile. Most likely a model from the Grand Prix was just that, a gold-colored Pontiac manufactured by GM. Renner attempted to track it down to a junkyard only to find it had been scrapped years earlier. While there was only that single known instance of a kid being in Dean's car with him, there were more rumors that Dean had invited kids back to his actual apartment. The one boy who was confirmed to have actually gone inside was named Dan, who later told Renner that he was a favorite pupil of Dean's, and the two became quite close. They stayed in contact after Dan graduated high school, with Dean writing letters that grew sexual in nature. Dean went as far as to set aside a trust fund for Dan, but the two eventually tapered off in their conversations and Dean took the money back. And as for the time frame when their friendship ended completely, through the time of Amy's initial disappearance. When Renner carried out this investigation in February 8th, he paid a visit to Dean in Key West, Florida, where Dean had fled to in February 3rd and was managing a fast food restaurant ever since. Dean vehemently denied any involvement with Amy or her murder, saying he always cooperated with the FBI, including taking lie detector tests, and moved to Florida for health reasons. He claimed he was always at school after hours and wouldn't have the time to go to the shopping center and abduct Amy so soon after the final bell rang. When Renner confronted Dean about his relationship with Dan, Dean chalked it up to being a difficult time in his life, but maintained they never became physical with one another. Renner also asked Dean if he could have been at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center in 1989, like Tom Paksinski claimed, and Dean told him he might have been but couldn't remember being there. Before he left, Renner asked one more question, wondering if Dean used a logbook at the Science Center to gather phone numbers of young girls from North Olmsted. Dean said he has nothing to confess to, that he was done talking and walked away. While the evidence is circumstantial at best, the clues and patterns associated with Dean definitely suggest something more sinister could have been at play. He had a childhood filled with trials and terrors, like facing beatings from his father. The death of his twin at such a young age is also theorized to be an underlying factor similarly seen in other criminals' upbringings. But of course, a tragic childhood does not mean someone will grow to be a criminal. More suspicious is the eyewitness testimonies of animal cruelty and pedophilic comments, including the possibility of inappropriate touching. He was familiar with the New London countryside, which investigators say is a key to the killer's placement of Amy's corpse on County Road 1181. He also had the all-important connection to the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, and a known fascination with prepubescent girls. Not only that, but people have pointed out that when he refused to renew his teaching license and fled from the schooling system, it aligns with the time frame that states mandated all educators be fingerprinted for a national database to obtain a license. Top it off with a car that could have matched the description of the gold fibers on Amy's body, and everything seems to fit like the perfect puzzle piece. However, there is an equal chance Dean did not kidnap and kill Amy. One has to consider the slim chance he could have run out of school to make it to the shopping center in time to take her at the time she was abducted. Also remember that as a former teacher, the other kids would have easily recognized him, and those who did describe Amy's captor described him as having dark brown hair. Dean's hair is a dirty blonde. The FBI had Dean zeroed in as prime suspect number 1 for a while, but came out in 2019 that whoever did indeed murder Amy probably wasn't someone they had already investigated, making it sound that Dean had been cleared after years of interviews, past polygraphs, and extreme vetting processes. Like so many other names and suspects that were spewed in various theories, Dean Runkle became just that, just another maybe. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Amy Milojevic's unsolved murder, we want to make it known that our conclusions are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each video, and we do not attempt to promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings that we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and reports. While the carousel of suspects in Amy's case is never-ending, we are confident the man who took Amy's life was a long-time resident of northern Ohio, familiar with Bay Village and its neighboring communities. He was confident in his incredibly risky approach in contacting young girls, displaying a disregard for consequence yet a clinical skill set in remaining undetected. He was certainly a serial predator, and whether or not he has struck before is impossible to say, but without a doubt, he planned his strategies to the finest detail. The killer most certainly had connections to the Lake Erie Science and Nature Center. And if he wasn't an employee, he was probably a guest or volunteer who frequented enough to know about the logbook and understand it was a trove of phone numbers and contact information for his victims. He could also have worked at either General Motors or Trading Times magazine with one of Amy's parents, knowing their schedules as well as hers and coordinating his attack using this information. Ken Lanning, one of the founders of the Behavioral Science Unit for the FBI and interviewed in that same James Renner article previously discussed, makes very good points regarding the theoretical murderer. He talked about how most child molesters aren't actual killers, but rather influential figures who convince their victims to trust them. They only use violence as a last resort, say if the victim fights back or if the trust factor never leads to physical contact. Lanning continued to point out that serialized murdered children are often the result of strangers getting their hands tied behind their backs, for a perpetrator would be leaving too much of a trail to victimize someone close to them. Again, this is using the theory of a serial predator and not a one-off homicide. Amy's case fits Lanning's profile of a child molester attempting to seduce his targets, and her subsequent murder the effect of his ultimate failure to do so. Amy's nails were chipped when her corpse was found, signaling she fought her attacker until he gave up and took her life. So was Dean Runkle the man responsible? It's certainly possible, but so too are any of the other names the FBI listed in their investigation. The scariest part is that the killer could be someone nobody expected, someone who became so invisible, their face was never even considered. Not even the police sketches of the abductor give us a concrete answer, as law enforcement have said the drawing is a simple estimation and likely inaccurate. Ultimately, the path to a justified conclusion may lie in the eventual procurement of DNA evidence linked to a specific individual. Police did recover partial hairs that didn't belong to Amy or her family, and these have recently been submitted for DNA analysis. While it's uncertain whether a full DNA profile can be obtained without the root of the hair, the fact that such evidence is still being discovered 30 years later offers a glimmer of hope for further developments. In the end, we must remember Amy not for the tragic afternoon of October 27, 1989, but for the vibrant, joyful moments leading up to that day. Let us honor her infectious compassion and beautiful spirit, cherishing the memory of her delicate humanity. Think of Amy as the free-spirited, nature-loving young girl with infinite potential, a soul eager for adventure, a gifted mind, and someone who brought happiness to all who knew her. Remember her as the girl who loved horses and animals, offering comfort to living creatures around her. Rather than focusing on the sensationalized myths of the Bay Village boogeyman, what truly matters is preserving Amy Milojevic's memory, ensuring she is remembered with love and respect. And with unwavering hope, we hold out for the day when justice is finally served, bringing peace to Amy's family and honoring the life of a brilliant child who was taken far too soon. The Grimmer family. January 12, 1970 was meant to be a typical day for the Grimmer family. Originally from Bristol, England, they had made the life-altering choice to move to Australia 2 years earlier. They had settled in Illawarra, New South Wales at the Fairy Meadow Migrant Hostel, where the family consisted of 26-year-old Carol, 24-year-old Vince, 7-year-old Ricky, 5-year-old Stephen, 4-year-old Paul, and 3-year-old Cheryl. On January 12th, the Grimmers planned a visit to the nearby Fairy Meadow Beach. The only family member missing from the trip was Vince, who was working as a combat engineer for the Australian Army and couldn't join them. While the children played under the warm summer sun, the weather suddenly changed in the afternoon around 2 p.m. as winds picked up, shifting direction and blowing sand everywhere. At this point, Carol decided it was time to leave and started gathering their things. She instructed the children to wash off together in the shower block before they headed home. However, 10 minutes later, Ricky, the oldest child, approached his mother and explained that 3-year-old Cheryl was refusing to leave the shower block. Carol quickly followed Ricky back to the showers but found Cheryl was no longer there. Growing increasingly worried, the mother of 4 ran to a nearby house and asked the residents to call the police. Around this time, witnesses reported seeing a man carrying a girl they believed to be Cheryl. They recalled him holding the toddler up to drink from a water fountain before fleeing the scene, with Cheryl wrapped in a towel. It's now believed that the witnesses may have been mistaken in their recollection. Ricky later told police that he had picked up his younger sister so she could drink from the fountain. It's thought that the witnesses had seen this but mistook Ricky for an older man. Other reports at the time mentioned seeing Cheryl in a white car. New South Wales police arrived quickly, and the disappearance of the toddler triggered an extensive search. After 24 hours, authorities had formulated 4 theories regarding Cheryl's possible whereabouts. When announcing their findings to the press, the police shared that they believed there were several possibilities. Cheryl could have hidden herself somewhere and fallen asleep. She might have wandered into the ocean and been swept away. She could have fallen into a waterway, or she might have been taken by someone with malicious intent. Another 24 hours passed without any trace of the missing 3-year-old. Given the extensive search efforts, if Cheryl had experienced an accident or simply hidden herself, she would likely have been found by now. The absence of any sign of her led investigators to rule out the first 3 theories. Cheryl's disappearance was now being treated as a potential crime. Someone had taken her, and the challenge was now to figure out who. With several leads in hand, the police began their investigation into the individual responsible for Cheryl's abduction. Among the leads they pursued was a reported sighting of a blue Volkswagen Type 2 near the beach around the time of the disappearance. 3 days after Cheryl went missing, the police received a ransom letter, which they believed to be legitimate. The note writer demanded that they be given $10,000 in exchange for Cheryl's safe return. They noted that the 3-year-old was currently unharmed. Investigators got to work setting up a drop in the Wollongong suburb of Bully, placing officers dressed as council workers nearby. The money was dropped off, but the letter writer never collected the cash. It was initially feared that the large-scale police operation and the carefully placed undercover officers had spooked the perpetrator. But as the letter writer never made contact with the authorities again, it was assumed that the ransom demand was a hoax. By 1971, had still not been found, and the police had established 3 main suspects in the case, although none could be definitively identified as the man witnesses had seen on the day of the disappearance. 15 months after Cheryl went missing, a local teenager handed himself over to New South Wales police. The 17-year-old from Victoria claimed that he had abducted and taken the life of the toddler. He reportedly gave an overview of the events on January. The teenager provided a detailed description of the area where Cheryl was allegedly buried, mentioning tubular steel gates, a cattle guard, a track, and a small creek, which were all close to where her body was supposedly found. According to an article in the Illawarra Mercury, several pieces of information the teenager provided were specific details about the crime that only the person responsible could have known. He accurately described the blue swimsuit Cheryl was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with the white towels she had with her. The teenager also outlined the route he had taken from the beach to the Balgownie area, where he claimed to have buried her body. He even took detectives to the location, although it was under development for housing at the time. He allegedly told the police, "I think this is it, but it's all changed." However, when the police interviewed the property owner, his description was contradicted. The owner pointed out that the cattle guard had been installed recently, and it had not been there at the time of Cheryl's disappearance. He also noted that there had never been a tubular gate in the area. The discrepancies in the teenager's account led investigators to conclude that his confession was likely false. A police report written by Detective Sergeant Philip Finley stated that, without material evidence directly linking the teenager to the missing child, it would not be appropriate to take any further action at that time. Despite the efforts of police, which included several public appeals and the offering of a $5,000 reward, no trace of Cheryl Grimmer was ever found and her case began to grow cold. Her family, in the meantime, decided to move back to the UK. The tragic story of their daughter's disappearance was nationwide and a public spectacle, and they struggled to live normally in Australia as they no longer had the anonymity they once did. For years, Cheryl's case lay dormant. The past, and then came the all without progress on the case. It wasn't until the case began to receive some media attention again when New South Wales Police Minister Mike Gallagher stated that while it was possible the 3-year-old and the culprit were both dead at this point, he hoped that someone might know the truth and might come forward with that information. He also speculated that the little girl had been alive for the last several decades without knowing her true identity. He encouraged anyone with questions about their past who may suspect they are the Grimmer's daughter to come forward. In February 2000, such woman came forward, but a DNA test proved she was not the missing toddler. In February, a coroner formally ruled that Cheryl was deceased, having passed away shortly after her disappearance. The cause of death was noted as being undetermined, and the coroner recommended that the New South Wales police reopen the investigation. Carol Grimmer noted her belief that her daughter was still alive, stating, "It's not just a mother's hope, it's annoying." Taking on board the coroner's advice, the police put forward a $100,000 reward for information regarding the case. Afterwards, Wollongong detectives and the Homicide Squad's Unsolved Homicide team combined into a new task force called Strike Force Wessel. In February 2016, a review of the evidence was carried out. Every detail was put into the police computer system for the first time, and fresh eyes on the case revealed that many leads had not been thoroughly followed by investigators back in 1970. Felt that the 1971 confession in particular had been dismissed too easily. Armed with this information, they made their way back to the property where the 17-year-old had claimed to have carried out the murder. Here, detectives questioned the landowner's son, who in fact contradicted everything his father had stated previously. He claimed that the cattle guard was certainly in place and that the tubular gate had been there too. There was also a track leading to a creek on the land. All of these details had been mentioned by the 17-year-old in his original statement. It is unclear why the property owner countered all of these claims in 1971. Later that year, it was revealed that 3 witnesses from 1970 had come forward after they recalled seeing a male teenager loitering around the shower block where Cheryl had gone missing. The police also announced they had a credible lead on a man who was spotted with a fair-haired child in his arms at the time of the disappearance. The man would be in his 60s, and they asked him to come forward. And began examining the Mounts Penang training school for boys. They believed that their prime suspect had spent time attending the reformatory school during the indicated that they had been provided with this information by someone who believed the former staff or students would be able to shed light on their inquiry. Then it appeared that the case had finally been cracked. The police announced on March 23rd that a man had been arrested in Frankston, a suburb of Melbourne, at 1 p.m., on that he was currently being extradited from Victoria. The individual, whose name has been kept out of the public, was charged at Wollongong Police Station with Cheryl's abduction and subsequent murder, and then imprisoned at the Silverwater Correctional Complex. Investigators noted that it was unlikely Cheryl's body would ever be recovered due to the fact that much development had occurred over the years since her death. 1 month later, the police announced that they were trying to trace a family who gave a witness statement on the day of the abduction. Shortly after the toddler went missing, the family moved to Papua New Guinea, then back to their native Nottinghamshire in England. Interpol assisted in tracing the family, and they were eventually located. Their testimonies were believed to be highly important in the court case. Yet another month passed, and in May 0, It was revealed that the suspect in custody was the same person who, as a 17-year-old, had confessed to the slayings back in 1971. At the time, his admittance had been dismissed due to inconsistencies, but investigators had now dispelled those inconsistencies. The accused was currently 63 years old, but was around 16 at the time of the murder, making him a minor. It is for this reason his name has never been disclosed. The individual had been born in the UK like Cheryl and had moved to Australia during this time. More information about the man's confession was revealed, and it was chillingly noted that he had told doctors in 1970 that he had urges to kill himself and kill other people. In his 1971 admission, the suspect claimed that he'd hidden with Cheryl in a nearby drain for about 35 minutes after he had taken her. He gagged her with a handkerchief and tied her hands behind her back. Emerging from the drain, he walked around 1.8 miles with the toddler to Balgony. According to the case prosecutor, the suspect intended on sexually assaulting Cheryl, although the 63-year-old would later deny this claim, labeling it as bullshit. In his confession, he told the police that he had removed the gag from Cheryl's mouth, but that she'd started to scream and ignored him when he told her to shut up. He quickly put his hands around her neck and strangled her to death in a bid to get her to be quiet. Afterwards, he panicked, removed her clothes, and placed bushes and dirt over her body before he returned to Fairy Meadow Beach. Later, the suspect sought bail. Prosecutors were opposed to this, claiming he was a flight risk as he was not an Australian citizen and still possessed a British passport. The prosecution noted the evidence against the 63-year-old was strong, stating, he said that he'd been staying at the time in a Sydney hostel and caught the train to Fairy Meadow that morning and hung out at the beach. He then provided significant details in relation to the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Cheryl, details of which are confirmed by eyewitness accounts and details which the prosecution says could only be known to the offender. Meanwhile, the suspect's lawyer, Laura Fennell, said that it would be argued at trial that her client was significantly mentally unwell at the time of his 1971 confession, rendering his admittance inadmissible. She added that the case was already troublingly weak and that in that he had also admitted to the slaying of a prison guard, but this was found to be untrue. Ultimately, Magistrate Michael Stoddard refused bail, stating, in my interview, on the face of it, there's a strong case against the accused in relation to the charge of murder. He noted that there were no bail conditions that could lessen the risk he posed if he was released. The suspect appeared at the Supreme Court of New South Wales on September 7, 2018 via a video link. He confirmed his name, entered a not guilty plea, and said nothing further. His trial was due to begin on Friday, February 15, 2019. However, a judge ruled that a key part of the prosecution's case could not be used as evidence in the trial, the evidence being the suspect's 1971 confession. The admittance couldn't be used as the suspect was a minor at the time and did not have an adult representative present during the police interview. And even though this wasn't legally necessary in the rule that the interview should be excluded on the basis of unfairness. He also referenced testimony from psychologists who'd reviewed the case for trial and noted that the 63-year-old had low intellect and would be more vulnerable to influence at the time. As this evidence was crucial to the case, the prosecution felt they were unable to continue forward. The man was released and his case has remained dormant since. Carol and Vince Grimmer passed away shortly after the case was reopened but Cheryl's brothers, Ricky and Stephen, have expressed their surprise and distress at the outcome of recent events. Ricky Nash told reporters, "We're just a bit numb, a bit shocked. No words can describe how I feel at the moment." In February 2016, Stephen Grimmer shared his deep sense of loss, saying, "My mom and dad have passed on not knowing, and we want to know too before we pass on." Ricky, the eldest of the Grimmer brothers, seems to have been most affected by Cheryl's disappearance, revealing, "The decisions I made on the day were wrong. It's been with me all my life. I just want it over with. I shouldn't have left." He added, "Everyone says it's not your fault. Come and stand where I'm standing. See what it feels like." Ricky also expressed a desire to know where his sister's remains were, stating, "Give us something that we can go and mourn." Cheryl Jean Grimmer was last seen at the shower block on Fairy Meadow Beach, New South Wales, on January 12, 1970. At just 3 years old, she stood 3 feet tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. A distinguishing feature of Cheryl was a navel that protruded 1 centimeter due to a medical condition. On the day of her disappearance, she was wearing a royal blue swimming suit with net paneling and carrying a white towel. A $1 million reward is currently being offered for information regarding her case. If you have any details, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 33,000. Moving on to the next case. Joy Hibbs. On April 19, 1991, around 1 p.m., David Hibbs returned home from school, eager to share the news that he had made the honor roll. However, upon approaching his house in Corydon, Pennsylvania, he noticed smoke billowing from the windows. He rushed to the back kitchen door, but heavy smoke prevented him from entering. As he observed the scene, he noticed the gas stove burners were all lit, which led him to believe that his mother, Joy Hibbs, had been cooking and perhaps forgotten to turn off the stove. In panic, David called out for help, and his neighbors, who were working nearby, heard him. They attempted to enter the house to find Joy, but the fire was too intense. They immediately called the fire department. Despite their efforts to control the blaze with a garden hose, the fire continued to rage until firefighters arrived. After what seemed like an eternity, the fire was finally extinguished. Tragically, a paramedic informed 10-year-old David that his mother had not survived. Firefighters discovered Joy's body in David's bedroom, where she had been brutally assaulted. She had been so badly burned that she was unrecognizable. While the initial belief was that Joy had died in an accidental fire, an autopsy revealed a chilling truth. There was no sign that Joy had inhaled smoke, suggesting she had already been dead before the fire started. Further investigation uncovered that she had been violently attacked, strangled with wire cords, and stabbed 5 times in the chest and neck. The fire, it seemed, had been deliberately set to destroy evidence. This was a clever cover-up approach by the killer, given that the house had been completely destroyed from the fire, and that the neighbors had destroyed important evidence while attempting to put out the fire. According to the findings of the fire marshal's investigation, the fire originated from 4 different locations in the home, 2 in the kitchen, 1 in David's bedroom, and 1 in the corridor. According to the investigators, the morning of her death, Joy had cashed her paycheck. Her purse's contents were tossed on the living room floor, and the police found her wallet stuffed under the couch. The absence of evidence was compounded by the difficulty the investigators experienced in determining a motive. Joy was adored by all, worked part-time as a medical assistant, and was committed to her family. David Hibbs described his mother as graceful, polite, and easygoing. Authorities had no leads whatsoever as to the person who would want to kill her. On the day she was killed, Joy had dropped her 2 kids off at school in the morning. She received her paycheck, ran a few errands, and got home shortly after 11 o'clock in the morning. A church pastor and another member of the congregation dropped by for a visit shortly after she returned home. Joy Hibbs had indicated a desire to celebrate Easter in the church. Just before noon, the pastor and a member of the church departed the Hibbs family house. According to eyewitnesses, there was a dark blue Monte Carlo parked across the Hibbs yard shortly after the church pastor and his member left. The car was said to have remained there until 1 p.m. 2 days after Joy Hibbs' murder, former Bristol County Police Chief Tommy Mills, who was also a narcotics detective, reached out to the residence of Robert Francis Atkins in Falls, Pennsylvania. Robert lived about 2 hours away from where Joy Hibbs lived. Joy and her husband would occasionally buy tiny amounts of marijuana from Robert Atkins, who also appeared to have been their former neighbor. Robert resisted letting the detectives into his house. In the driveway, Detective Tommy Mills spotted a dark-colored Monte Carlo that matched a witness's description of a similar vehicle parked carelessly outside Joy's house shortly before the neighborhood heard the fire. However, during further investigation, the witness said Robert Atkins' automobile wasn't the one they saw. Robert Atkins was invited to undergo a polygraph by the investigators, but he refused, explaining that he had damaged his arm and that his lawyer had instructed him to wait since the nerve damage would affect the polygraph results. He further disclosed that he was camping at the Poconos with his family, friends, and co-workers when Joy's murder took place. Detectives soon verified his alibi. Robert confirmed that he bought a little marijuana for the Hibbs, but he wasn't a dealer. In the weeks preceding his mother's murder, David Hibbs overheard her arguing with Robert Atkins on the phone over the most recent purchase of a baggie of marijuana. Because the baggie was packed with stems and seeds, Joy demanded her money back from Robert. When asked by the police, Robert confirmed these arguments. He, however, stated that he had informed Joy that he couldn't refund her the money. According to him, it was simply improper. Investigators couldn't understand how a few tiny baggies of marijuana could cause someone to die. The couple was only spending $20 to $40 on marijuana at a time, not enough to get the attention of major sellers. On April 27, 1991, a co-worker of April Atkins, the wife of Robert Atkins, came forward to say that on the day Joy Hibbs was murdered, she had called the Atkins residence between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., and Robert Atkins had picked up the call. On hearing this, the police now thought Joy's murder took place between 11:50 and 12:50. The police turned their attention to Joy's private life after determining that Robert Atkins' alibi appeared to be flawless. They questioned Joy's relatives and friends and found nothing unusual. Except for the person who had killed Joy, no one seemed to harbor any wicked intentions for her. Robert Atkins was still a person of interest in the case despite having an alibi, though. 23 years after Joy was brutally murdered, a new Bristol Township detective, Michael Slaughter, was assigned the cold case in April 2014. Detective Slaughter made the decision to visit April Atkins, who claimed that she had never been questioned by authorities regarding the death of Joy Hibbs. She, however, clung to the narrative that her family was on vacation in the Poconos that weekend and hadn't learned of Joy's murder until they returned. A few days later, Detective Slaughter re-interrogated Robert Atkins regarding his movements at the time of Joy's death. He supported his wife's account of going camping and revealed to Slaughter that he had been a secret narcotics informant in 1991, doing drug deals and then reporting them to the police. During an interview with Slaughter in May 2014, a co-worker of Joy claimed that on the Monday before she was killed, a man called Joy at work and threatened to kill her. The co-worker decided not to report the call to the police because Joy's husband was now the focus of the investigation at the time. 2 years later, in September 2016, April Atkins, who is now divorced, traveled to the Bristol Township Police Station in order to provide a taped statement regarding her ex-husband's whereabouts during the murder of Joy Hibbs. Detective Slaughter was informed by April that Robert Atkins had returned home covered in blood after allegedly stabbing someone and setting their home on fire. He then instructed her to gather the children, take a few days off work, and travel to the Poconos in the north. Out of anxiety and fear, April remained silent. That day, Robert Atkins took a shower after washing his blood-stained clothing. April Atkins didn't learn about the murder of Joy Hibbs until after her family returned from a trip to the Poconos. Despite the revelation, the case remained inactive for another 5 years. That was until November 2021, when Bucks County Detective David Hanks tracked down a former co-worker of April Atkins from 1991. Initially, the co-worker denied knowing April. However, when subpoenaed by the district attorney to testify before a grand jury about a phone call she had made to the Atkins household, the co-worker changed her story. The call had been answered by Robert Atkins, who was supposed to be camping in the Poconos at the time. In the following month, Detective Hanks managed to record a conversation between Robert Atkins and his ex-wife, April. This conversation led Robert to believe that April had informed her roommate about his involvement in Joy Hibbs' murder, which caused his anger and anxiety to escalate. Further damning testimony came from Robert's son, who in April 2022 testified that his father had confessed to him in December that he expected to be arrested soon for something that had happened many years ago. Robert had mentioned a woman dying in a fire before later revealing that she had been stabbed. After 31 years of evading justice, Robert Atkins was arrested in May 2022. He is currently being held at the Bucks County Correctional Facility, facing multiple charges, including first-degree and second-degree murder, 7 counts of arson, 2 counts of robbery, and 7 counts of first-degree arson, all related to the tragic death of Joy Hibbs. Moving on to the next case. Krista Bramlett. In 1996, 23-year-old Krista Bramlett lived in New Providence, Tennessee. Struggling financially, she resided in a mobile home, while her 2 young children had moved to live with her mother in Corpus Christi, Texas. Krista remained behind, hoping to finish her GED program. However, the area surrounding her home had become increasingly unsafe, plagued by rising crime rates, including burglaries and drug-related offenses. Sadly, Krista became one of the many victims of the community's worsening troubles. On the afternoon of October 28, 1996, her landlord knocked on the door of her mobile home in Sunnydale Mobile Home Park, located just off Peachers Mill Road. When there was no answer, the landlord grew concerned and decided to check inside. It was there that he discovered Krista's body. She had sustained injuries to her throat, and the autopsy revealed that she had been suffocated. Additionally, it was determined that she had been indecently assaulted. Investigators collected male DNA from her body and sent it to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab to create a DNA profile. The DNA profile was submitted into the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made. Investigators were only able to confirm that the DNA belonged to a black male. Without any other leads in the case, investigators could not identify the culprit, and the case went cold. It was only on February 13, 2019 that the Clarksville Police Department detective, Michael Urey, got the news he was waiting for. The DNA in the combined DNA index system matched a man who was living in Phoenix, Arizona. The man is 48-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth. Hudspeth had never come up in the investigation up to this point, and he was on nobody's radar. In February, Detective Urey interviewed Hudspeth and discovered that he was indeed in Clarksville at the time Krista's life was taken. He moved away from the area in December of 1997. Hudspeth admitted that he knew Krista and said he was the last person to see her alive. As a result of the DNA evidence and this interview, Hudspeth was arrested and charged in connection with the case. Investigators also took a look at Hudspeth's arrest record. They could see that he had been arrested several times on charges like domestic assault and felony assault. He has spent time in Arizona and Texas prisons. This brings up the question, why wasn't his DNA collected years ago? In June 2019, Hudspeth made his first appearance in Montgomery County Court in connection with the charges against him. The case went to trial in September 2021. During the trial, half of a 3-hour interview conducted by Detective Ullery with Hudspeth was shown to the jury. Hudspeth admitted that he had been using drugs at the time and could not recall whether he had assaulted or killed Krista, but he expressed hope that he had not done so. It was also revealed that Hudspeth's DNA was found on Krista's body, on her bra, and on 2 cigarette butts collected from the scene. After 4 days of testimony, Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty of all charges on September 11. In January 2022, at 51 years old, Hudspeth was sentenced to life in prison, with an additional 20 years for his crimes.